I don't know. There's Michael King. I'll ask him and see if Jeff's in here. I don't know if Jeff's in here. So Cassie, you're unmuted, and then
Jeff is not going to be able to.
okay, that's fine. That's fine.
So it's me and Mike.
All right. So whoever is the right person to answer these questions, just go ahead and answer. And Mike, I asked you to unmute. So when you get a chance, you could do that. Oh, there you go. All right. Oops. All right, there we go. All right, what is homeowner responsibilities for maintaining both the sidewalks and the proposed bike path? Do we have answers to that? Do we know?
Mike, do you want to talk about, so generally Metro, we have a fund to do the repairs on sidewalks. Mike, do you want to talk about the bike path? Because I actually don't know the answer to that one.
Yeah, absolutely. And 2 apologies real quick. 1, sorry I was late. Just forgot to put it on my calendar. And 2, sorry my camera's not on because I'm driving. The answer to your question for the bike lanes, in terms of like sweeping and things like that, is that the maintenance responsibility you're talking about?
Yeah, what do we also have to maintain the sidewalks? So what are those? And then with the bike path, do we need to do anything, or does the city take care of everything?
The city would take care of it. So there's kind of two sides to maintenance. There's the general sweeping or snow removal, those kind of things. The city takes care of that on bike lanes, maybe not as well as it should, but it does take care of that. Sidewalks, generally residents tend to remove snow from sidewalks. The city doesn't have resources to be able to do that. In terms of like repairs though, for sidewalk repairs or repairs to a bike facility, that would be on the city.
Do you know how often it's cleaned, the bike lanes?
They are supposed to get cleaned quarterly, so 3 to 4 times a year.
Oh gosh, okay. All right, let's go to the next question. Because emerging vehicles use this path, speed bumps, I'm told, is not an option. What about additional stop signs to slow traffic for the sake of public safety? Now, I've heard that you can't put a 4-way stop in with stop signs because the traffic going the other way is so low that it's, I guess there's a rule. But I mean, for the sake of public safety, is there not an option to try to put a stop sign in and just see if it actually does slow down traffic? You have any comments on our neighborhood in that situation?
Yeah, that's true. There's what's called a 40-60 rule. And what that shows is you've got to have somewhere between 40 to 60% of the traffic being equal coming on both sides of a street for a stop sign to be put in. Does that make sense?
Yeah. But is that set in stone, or can someone advocate for that and have something put in to see if it actually slows down traffic?
It really is with our public works department. There have been a lot of instances across the city where folks have pushed for stop signs because real or perceived safety threats for cars going through areas. So our public works department traditionally has not put those in. There are probably some exceptions to the rule that have happened. So it's certainly something to be advocated for, but you would be up against that 40-60 rule that our traffic engineers tend to rely on.
Okay, so you're saying it's not impossible, right? Right? You still there? Can you hear me? Cassie, can you hear me? Oh, did I lose someone? Check here. Hold on, guys. I'm checking. I don't know if I lost. We are muted again. Oh, I see. Okay, let's unmute.
Thanks. Yeah, sorry.
Sorry.
I think we both got muted again. Yeah, so what I was going to say is, just to echo Mike's point, the MUTCD, which is the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices, which by law, we have said as a city that we're going to use, basically won't let you use stop signs just to slow down traffic. They say that they are for managing right-of-way only and that they should not be used to control speeds. I know I and some other council members think that this is, a little silly sometimes, but that manual basically says 4-way stops should never be used just to slow traffic. There are studies that show that if people come to a 4-way stop, slow down, and there aren't cars that sort of are also approaching it, and it's just for traffic slowing, then they actually accelerate on the other side of it because they see it as an unnecessary stop, and it can be less safe. So,
Okay.
it doesn't mean there have been times that I can think of one instance where they've gone against the MUTCD to allow a stop sign. Even though there wasn't, it sort of didn't go up against this 60-40 rule that Mike was describing, but it's very, very rare.
Okay. Could we expand the existing sidewalks to create an off-street mobility lane from the 8 feet lane to a 9 feet lane on each side? This was a comment from a resident. I don't know if you guys could even speak on this. It might be a Chris Glasser question, but this is what we're talking about. You see the bike lane, it's basically taking up 9 feet there. And you could actually maybe do that instead on the sidewalks and get rid of the little green spot there. Any comments on that?
Yeah, I mean, I will say, I actually loved that idea of making like an actual sort of like parking protected space, and ask some folks to look into how much something like that would cost.
Yeah.
And they said it was going to be at least $2.3 million.
Yeah. And I had this in my notes that it's probably going to be super expensive to do that.
Yeah, but I do appreciate the attempt to like think creatively about how we can make sure everyone's sort of getting around the neighborhood, expanding the pie, as it were. So I appreciate the creative question.
Sure. There's a question from a resident at 1523 North Parkway. Where are they expected to park? We have no room for a garage and no other place to add a parking space. There are 3 to 4 vehicles for this building alone, and there's never parking on the other side of the street in the evening. This is where they are located. That street in the middle there is just an alley. They don't have any parking there. On the other side is the nursing home. I mean, Cassie, where are they going to park if this is put in?
Yeah, I mean, without being super familiar, I think I would have to like visit the site, look at the design. I think the point behind this is someone saying like, hey, this would really negatively impact me and my day-to-day living. I certainly acknowledge that can be true. I don't know this particular location, but I believe this person when they say that they would, have nowhere to park right in front of their house and no alley parking or no driveway parking.
Sure. And I know what with the streets here, though, they would actually have to go to Sherwood or Stevens, or they would have to park on the left side across there, but those lanes are already taken up in the evening. And that's that person that brought that up. So let's go to the next question. Is this a data-driven proposal where data on safety concerns or other concerns was collected and analyzed? If so, by whom, and will it be made available to the public?
So I'm not quite sure that I understand the question. I will say Metro government. So just to step back and talk a little bit about process, and then I'll let Mike King, he might need to be unmuted again too, because it looks like
let me check. Okay.
But I'll let him chime in too. So to sort of the point on transparency process, where this is coming from, this is not something where Metro government looked at a bunch of crash histories and said, hey, this is a particular problem. What can we do to solve this problem? We do that sometimes. Sometimes we, like with the Bardstown Road area, we look and we say, hey, where are our hotspots for crashes in the city? What can we do to reduce these crashes? We look at that in terms of pedestrians, in terms of bikes, in terms of vehicles with vehicles. And in those cases, Metro will be the one that sort of says, what can we do to solve these particular problems? This is one where a nonprofit group, I'm guessing a lot of you came to the meeting with Streets for People, said, hey, we as advocates for mobility lanes, for multimodal infrastructure, think that this would be a really good place to do something like this. And so a lot of folks who were at the meeting saw that they had put together their data and sort of made their case for it. But this is not a case where Metro has collected and analyzed any data. Mike,
Okay.
do you want to add anything to that?
That's really accurate. The only thing I would sort of add is, like, again, this isn't a Metro plan. There's no plan from Louisville Metro. I know it seems like there's some people that think this is a done deal, that Metro's kind of conniving behind the scenes. I can assure you that's not the case. If, and I'll put a really big emphasis on if, the only way anything could potentially go forward on here would be if we had a probably more legitimized parking analysis, a more detailed sort of breakdown of the usage of the street and what that facility would look like. So while we appreciate the data that Streets for People put out there, if this were to ever even be considered moving forward, we would need a lot more data to do so.
And I will say, just to add a sort of point to that, so Metro, we are not an advocacy group, right? Advocacy groups, they advocate, they put out ideas, they get feedback on those ideas, they start conversations. Metro government is in this department full of planners and engineers, two professions that I would say are not known for moving quickly on much of anything. No offense, Mike. So I will say, and again, I don't think anyone knows, I'll emphasize Mike's big emphasis on if. We're probably talking about months, if not years, of data collection before Metro would even know if it was feasible or not.
Okay.
Because engineers want to look at every contingency, the width of the streets, the angles, all those concerns that you all raised about the junctures, the emergency vehicles making the turns, things like that. Engineers, ultimately the person that signs off on this would be Jeff Brown, who's the Assistant Director of Public Works. And they do not sign off on anything unless they have done a whole lot of studying, and we are not anywhere close to that place. So that's, again, that's not meant to suggest that there is any decision about moving forward one way or the other. It's to say that we are a very, very long way from any decision being made. Okay. Even if it progressed to the next stage.
Yeah, and Chris Glasser, I mentioned that too, that it might be a long way off if anything was actually done. All right, let's, there's parking and, so in the 2016 Deer Park neighborhood plan, it said, does parking in Norris have a calming effect on the 2000, as the 2000 Deer Park plan stated? This might be a Mike question, but does having parking on streets have a calming effect already?
It should, to an extent. It definitely in play. I lived on Douglas at one point, and having that buffer between cars and the sidewalk with the parked cars really helped me, and I think helps a lot of people feel a little bit safer on a sidewalk with that buffer. So parking has proven to be sort of a traffic calming technique. However, I would imagine you've heard from a lot of people, and I know for a fact Cassie's probably heard this from a lot of people. The street's probably not calm enough. People are still driving extremely fast through there, despite there being parked cars on the street.
Yep. Okay. Do you, Mike, your name was on that that plan. I don't know if you remember, but why and who would have made the recommendation for cyclists to use the off streets? I mean, is there any comments on that?
In the plan, who made that recommendation?
Yeah, like who would make that recommendations for bicyclists to use the off streets with the existing lane already, basically?
So the neighborhood plan itself covers a lot of ground. So when some conversations about whether or not bike facilities should be added to Douglas and Norris, the general consensus was that the neighborhood preferred people to use the off-street network. So that's why the neighborways were put into Deer Park.
Gotcha. This has been proposed or presented in the past. Why has it gotten this far so far this time outside of different leadership? Why is it getting so far this time? This has been proposed and presented even before 2016. It hasn't gotten that far, but why has it gotten this so far this time?
I can't speak to the Go ahead,
yeah, I mean, I could answer that. So I don't think when it says gotten this far, I think it depends on what you consider this far. So from a Metro government standpoint, this is still not something that Metro government has looked at or evaluated in any sort of specific way. What's happened is that a nonprofit advocacy group put forward an idea that has engaged the community. And I think it's wonderful that we have had so many people who have shown up and had opinions and talked about what they like in their neighborhood. And I recognize that some people are upset that we're even having the conversation, that this nonprofit put forward this idea. I will say, I think that this is sort of how democracy and how neighborhood conversations happen, is someone puts out an idea and people either say, we like this or we don't like this. And so, I think the conversation can be a really productive thing for neighborhoods to have and for neighbors to have with each other, so long as we all recognize that, like, ultimately, a lot of us share the same goal of making sure that our neighborhoods are like safe and, places that we all feel good about living in, even if folks disagree on the specifics, as long as the rhetoric doesn't get too out of hand. I think it could be a really helpful thing. So I would just push back on the idea that this has gotten particularly far. What's happened at this point is a nonprofit group said, hey, let's come together as a community to talk about this idea. Happens every day in our city on a whole host of topics. And I think ultimately it's really good for First Amendment, for public discourse, for all of those things.
Yeah. And the only reason I bring it up, there's notes from the Deer Park Association that Glasser presented to them, and they basically just kind of pushed it away. It's been on the back burner, I guess, on the city logs. To 2016 mentioned it. And I don't think Chris Glasser ever presented it to the community before. So I think it's gotten a little farther than it has in the past. And that's what the only reason I brought that up is, it looks like it's gotten a little farther than it has in the past. I just didn't know if there's something. I know there's Vision Zero and things like that. I didn't know if those things were trying to push these type of bike lanes.
I mean, I do think ultimately Vision Zero is about thinking about how we all get around safely in our city. And I hope that's a goal that we can all share, right?
Sure. But it's to get to 0 accidents per year, right?
It's 0 pedestrian fatalities.
Yeah.
Which I mean, I hope that we can all certainly acknowledge that that's an important goal. And if there's stop people from dying.
Yes, and I agree. And our neighborhood doesn't have that issue, but I know that other neighborhoods and other sections of the city do. Let's go to the next question. What is the step-by-step process for consideration and approval of the bike lane proposal? Have any of these been enacted? Who officially approves this and votes on this? I get, I know you guys, you've had a lot of questions on this. I think people just want a detailed, you've been through the Castlewood, you've been through the Cherokee Park closures. Like what would the actual steps look like here in terms of the approval, the votes, and what's already been enacted?
Sure, I can take that one, and then Mike can chime in on anything I missed, because some of this, so little bit of like backing up to the 1,000-foot level. So I am a legislator. Metro Council's your legislative body, just like the General Assembly in Frankfurt or Congress in the United States. The mayor is the executive body, just like the governor or the president. So the way this works is not that different than the way things work in Frankfurt or Congress. Every year we pass a budget, power of the purse, that says we as a city want to spend, it's been about the same every single year, $500,000, $500,000, not that much out of $1 billion city budget on multimodal infrastructure. The decision then on how to spend that is delegated to the agency that's responsible for it. And by that, I mean, we sort of give the pot of money to the mayor's administration, to Mike, to Jeff Brown, who's not here, and say, what projects, do you all want to spend this money on? And they work with neighborhoods to figure out what these projects look like, where they're going to go in terms of priorities, what are the highest on the funding list. And ultimately, the person that signs off on any particular plan is going to be Public Works. So there is no vote on something like this outside of Metro Council allocating the money for it. I've had people say, well, why isn't this something that Metro Council would vote on? Just as a sort of logistical matter, every day in our city, there are, hundreds of alterations to sort of the way that streets look, either through restriping, through repaving, through adding sidewalks, through restriping parking, to all of those sorts of things. And for Metro Council to weigh in on every single one of those things, one would sort of take away the ability, people think we move slow already, we would move much, much slower on any decision. And two, we quite frankly don't have the capacity to vote on every single change. I agree that it would be helpful for us to have more clear guidelines about these multimodal lanes, when we put them in, when we won't, because I think a lot of people are like, they're sort of like, well, we don't understand what it takes for Public Works to sign off on something like this. So we know that for something like speed humps, you have to get 70% of the neighbors saying affirmatively that they want speed humps, because adding speed humps takes away parking, because it can make it difficult to back out of your driveway, because all of these things. We don't have any requirements around multimodal lanes for like what the different thresholds are, what the process is. So I agree. I think it would be helpful for us to establish some guidelines around that. I will say those guidelines, those are not laws passed by Metro Council. Those are internal policies established by Public Works. So it could be that Public Works could put forward a set of guidelines that says, here is when we will consider, or here is what we will consider when we're looking at installing multimodal lanes. Was that a detailed enough answer? And Mike, did I miss anything?
No, I think that's good.
No, I think you covered it well. We have been working on a process of something, I'll say sort of similar to what the speed bumps is, but basically it's more sort of community driven idea of how folks could request as a community to have bike lanes put in. One of the challenges is everybody loves bike lanes as long as it's not in front of my house. So to get the people that want to do it, to get that sign off like you would for a speed bump is going to be very challenging, because a lot of people don't necessarily want the give and take of what is directly in front of them.
Sure. Next one, how will the general public be aware of the process, and will the neighborhood have a say or vote against or for this proposal? I know there's surveys out there. I know Streets for People did a survey. Mr. Glasser was kind enough to give us some of the results. 1,230 people took it, and 70% of those residents were outside of our neighborhood. So only 30% were from Deer Park. Cassie, does the neighborhood have any type of say in this?
Sure. So I will say right now, no official surveys from Metro have been circulated, right? There was one from Streets for People. There was one that was put together by yourself and some other folks that you worked with in the neighborhood. Certainly, and again, this is where there's no process for these protected bike lanes or multimodal lanes, in part because we just don't have very many in our city. And I think that it is important that we establish more processes going forward. Again, with something like speed humps, the neighborhood has a say, because you have to get you have to get 5 signatures from people in the neighborhood to even do a traffic study. Then you do a traffic study. If it comes back saying that the engineers think it's okay, then 70% of the residents have to sign off and say, yes, we actively want these on our street. Certainly, there would be a process equivalent to that in some way if Metro were to move forward with something like that. And again, I'm saying if, to emphasize that no decisions have been made. But I imagine that there would be some sort of survey of the people actually on the street, some sort of community meeting, some sort of attempt by the actual government agency to engage the public. Certainly, I would advocate for something like that.
All right. How will residents be notified if this proposal goes away? You know, we're just kind of in limbo. How will we know when this, will either be done there or go away? I know you said years. Like, we just kind of want to know, when we can maybe take our signs down.
Yeah. So I don't know exactly how to answer this, because I do think that a lot of these conversations about like land use are like an ongoing process. Always, we should all be always asking ourselves how we make things better, safer in our neighborhoods. I do think that if Public Works, I imagine we have a meeting scheduled where we're going to hear from Streets for People in a similar type of meeting to this. Personally, as an elected official, I think it's really important not to take any sort of public stands until you hear from both sides. I think it's disingenuous to say, hey, public, give me your feedback, but actually I've already made up my mind. I think it's really important to hear from everyone.
Okay.
I imagine after that, there are a lot of logistical questions that no one's even answered yet around, would this even be feasible from an engineering standpoint? There are a lot of things that Metro Public Works hasn't even considered. So I imagine what will happen after that is Mike, Jeff, Metro folks, me, will get together and sort of say, all right, we've now heard all of the information, what do you all think are the next steps? And I think that, I am a big proponent of government transparency. I think that after that conversation, that's something that should be shared with everyone who's expressed an interest in knowing what that is.
Okay. This might be a quick answer. Have you spoken to the mayor or anyone in the mayor's office about this proposal? If so, did the mayor state he would approve such products before his term was up? That has been brought up quite a few times.
The mayor's aware of this, but it's also been splashed in every news source, basically locally, that there is. the mayor will defer to public works staff on these kind of things. He doesn't necessarily say, yes, I want this, make this happen right here, right now. Any ideas that potentially come forth are vetted through him, and if he's very against it, he'll say so, but he normally defers to his staff. But the mayor's not pushing this.
Sure.
Ultimately, this is not a mayor's pet project that he's trying to push through or anything like that.
Okay.
And I will say, I think it's probably logistically impossible that anything like this would be anywhere close to being ready to signed off on before the end of the mayor's term.
It's true.
Now, Cassie, did you vote in favor of the cyclists to keep the road closed for automobiles in Cherokee Park Loop? If so, why? And why did some of your colleagues vote against the closure? Some residents are kind of curious where your mindset was with the Cherokee Park Loop and if this kind of translate with this bike lane too.
Sure. So I would push back. I don't think it was in favor of the cyclists. I think the compromise plan allowed vehicle access to all of the major amenities while setting aside part of the loop, less than half of the loop, specifically for pedestrians. When I listened to the neighborhood, that's what the majority of residents told me that they wanted. I also think that, from a sort of safety and shared use perspective, that was in the best interest of ensuring everyone could use the park safely. So, I know some people disagree with that vote or that decision. Obviously, the majority of Metro Council disagreed with that decision, and that's why the roads are fully reopened. We're working with Olmsted Parks right now on some plans for improved safety. We have sort of ongoing issues around vehicles going the wrong direction. We're trying to add some clearer signage, maybe trying to add some separation between pedestrians and vehicles. But that was a decision that I made based on what I heard from the community and what I believed was the best way to ensure that everyone had access to the park.
Sure. And I think some days it is closed, right? Completely. Is that true?
Yeah. So
that's a good compromise.
Right. So prior to the pandemic, Olmsted Parks was doing a closure the last Sunday of every month. Now that's happening last Sunday of every month from, I want to say 8 a.m. to 2 p.m.
Now, Cassie, do you have the power to drop this proposal? Like if you wanted to say, I don't want to move forward with this and I'm going to drop it, are you the person that can drop this?
Ultimately, this is something, no, the short answer is no. This is decided by Public Works and Advanced Planning. If I told them, heck no, I hate it, this is awful, I'm going to yell and scream and kick all the way, would they take that seriously? I think Mike and I have a good relationship. Jeff and I have a good relationship. I think they would listen to me and take my feedback seriously, but ultimately this is something that the mayor's staff, Mike and Jeff, are going to decide.
So Streets for People, they're actually advocating to Metro too, Public Works for this, not just you.
Yeah, I would say primarily to them, right? It's ultimately their decision. I appreciate that Mike and Jeff ask me for my input. They don't have to do that. They do that as a courtesy because they know a lot of folks don't necessarily understand who the decision maker is on these things. And so they give me their feedback, but ultimately this is something for Mike and Jeff.
Sure.
Did I say that right? I don't want to misstate anything. Would you agree with what I just said?
Yeah, absolutely. But it would be very difficult to do one of these without council, at least interest.
Right.
So do outside neighborhoods have more or equal say than the people in Deer Park or residents that live on Douglas and Norris? It's probably for Cassie.
So of course, anytime we're making changes to a neighborhood, the people that are most directly impacted are the ones that we are most interested in hearing from. I do want to flag, I know that we had set aside an hour for this, and I know Mike probably has something else. So just want to flag that we're probably about to lose Mike pretty soon.
Yeah, Mike, if you have to go, that's fine. I think we could just wrap it up now. It's 9 o'clock. So there's one more question here. So Cassie, during the Streets for People meeting, you stated community support was being accessed for this project, and you said you don't have a set definition for community support. If you don't have a definition for community support, how can you determine if there is any? And you followed up with, you're trying to determine how a neighborhood feels about things. You've had plenty of time, reactions, emails, calls, surveys about this. if the majority of affected people and business owners don't want this proposal, are you going to honor the request and try to drop it? But I think you said that Public Works is involved too. So it looks like we need to also talk with Public Works. I mean, any thoughts on this last question?
Yeah, so I'll just reiterate, ultimately, there's $500,000 in our $1 billion budget for bike lanes or for multimodal infrastructure, which might sound like a lot, but actually does not go very far. There are a lot of needs in our community. People are constantly trying to prioritize. And by people, I mean advanced planning, Mike, and Public Works, Jeff, and all of the council members who are actively saying, like, we want this project, we don't want this project, right? And so the idea of community support is usually we find ourselves in the opposite position that we're finding ourselves in now. Usually it's people saying, we really, really want this project to come to our neighborhood. We really think that this would be great. We would like this. And so usually you're looking for community support as a way to sort of, you know, the enthusiasm to prioritize something high. I don't know that, Mike, have you ever, we haven't had that many conversations about protected bike lanes. So Mike, have you ever sort of had tried to evaluate community support in the context of like the neighborhood saying that they don't want a proposed project? I feel like we're kind of in a new space here.
Well, if you look at, and yeah, you're pretty accurate on the separated bike facilities, but if you look at it bigger picture, I think there's kind of two components to it. Yes, we absolutely take the input of the folks that are most impacted at a very high level and really appreciate their response and think of that very deeply whenever we make decisions. But the roads are also part of a larger transportation network, and that transportation network is for all users out there. So we as advanced planning try to help engage the community, do some public education around some of these things as much as we can. And then our Public Works department, I mean, they're charged with providing safe, efficient, reliable transportation throughout the city. So we have to consider that in sort of a greater context when we make these decisions. So that probably sounds like a bit of a cop out on your question, and I don't intend for it to.
No,
We
that's
do
okay.
absolutely, yeah,
Yeah, I got you.
We have to think of that way.
I'll just piggyback. With the Castlewood, were the majority of residents against that or for it? Do you
The
guys?
majority of the residents are in a cemetery, so they didn't have much of a say. And that was something that we take into account on this is like Lexington Road, for example. When we did that first Lexington Road diet, one half of there's hardly any residential on that street. So we got a lot of pushback from a lot of the community in St. Matthews that viewed it as their individual highway into downtown, which our roads shouldn't be highways into downtown because we have highways that go into downtown.
I got you. All right. Well, I think that's it. I just want to thank Cassie and Mike for joining and answering questions and being put on the spot. I think you guys did a good job. I recorded this video, so it will be shareable. I'm not sure where I'm going to put it up at, but if people want access to it, I'll probably put it on YouTube or something. And so anyone that missed this meeting can watch it there. Looks like in the meeting here, someone asked for Mike and Jeff's emails or phone numbers. If you guys want to provide that, you can go ahead and do that. I was hoping we could get some live questions in, but I think it's too late now. So again, thanks guys for joining.
Bye, everyone.
See ya.